The desert wind carried dust and danger across the Afghan mountains as Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison adjusted his night vision goggles. His 6-man SEAL team had been moving through enemy territory for 3 days, tracking a high-value Taliban commander who had been coordinating attacks on coalition forces. The mission was supposed to be straightforward: locate, observe, and call in air support when the target was confirmed. Morrison's team consisted of some of the Navy's finest operators. Chief Petty Officer Carlos Ramirez served as the team's communications specialist, his weathered hands always ready on the radio equipment. Petty Officer First Class David Chen was their explosives expert, carrying enough firepower to level a small building. The youngest member, Petty Officer Second Class Tyler Brooks, had joined them fresh from advanced sniper training, his eager eyes constantly scanning the horizon through his rifle scope. Petty Officer Marcus Williams handled reconnaissance. His ability to read terrain and enemy movements had saved countless lives during previous deployments. The final member, Hospital Corpsman Second Class Amanda Foster, was not only their medic but also proved herself in combat situations that would challenge seasoned warriors. Together, they moved like shadows through the rocky terrain, each step calculated and silent. The intelligence had pointed them toward a remote compound nestled in a valley between 2 steep mountain ridges. Local informants reported regular meetings between Taliban leadership at this location, making it a prime target for surveillance. Morrison knew that capturing or eliminating the commander could disrupt enemy operations for months, potentially saving hundreds of coalition and civilian lives. As they approached the final ridge overlooking their target, Morrison raised his fist, signaling the team to halt. Through his binoculars, he could see the compound below, a collection of mud brick buildings surrounded by high walls. Guards patrolled the perimeter, their AK-47s slung casually over their shoulders, unaware of the American operators watching. From above, Chen set up his equipment to monitor radio communications while Ramirez established contact with their command post. The plan was simple: maintain overwatch for 24 hours, confirm the target's presence, and coordinate a precision strike that would eliminate the threat while minimizing civilian casualties. Brooks found an ideal shooting position behind a cluster of rocks, his M110 sniper rifle providing excellent coverage of the compound's main entrance. Williams began mapping escape routes and identifying potential threats in the surrounding area. Foster prepared her medical kit while keeping watch on their 6 o'clock position. The first 12 hours passed without incident. They observed normal activity: women carrying water, children playing in the courtyard, men discussing business near the main building. Morrison knew that patience was crucial in operations like this. One wrong move, one moment of carelessness, could compromise months of intelligence work and put his team in mortal danger. As the sun began to set on their second day of observation, Chen picked up increased radio chatter from the compound. His Arabic was limited, but he recognized enough words to understand that something important was happening. Multiple vehicles had arrived throughout the afternoon, and armed guards had increased their patrols around the perimeter. Morrison made the decision to move closer. He selected Williams and Foster to accompany him down the ridge for better intelligence gathering, while Ramirez, Chen, and Brooks maintained overwatch from their current position. The descent was treacherous in the fading light, requiring extreme caution to avoid dislodging rocks that could alert the guards below. They reached a position approximately 400 meters from the compound walls, just as darkness fell completely. Through his night vision equipment, Morrison could see clearly into the main courtyard where a meeting was taking place. He counted at least 15 armed men surrounding a figure who matched the description of their target commander. Williams whispered into his radio microphone, providing real-time intelligence to the Overwatch team and their command post. This was the opportunity they had been waiting for: multiple high-value targets in one location with minimal civilian presence. Morrison requested immediate air support, knowing that the window for this strike might close at any moment. Foster maintained security while monitoring for any signs that their presence had been detected. Her training had taught her to trust her instincts, and something about the situation felt wrong. The guards seemed more alert than usual. Their movements suggested they might be expecting trouble. Back at the Overwatch position, Brooks noticed movement on the adjacent ridgeline through his rifle scope. At first he thought it might be local goat herders, but the disciplined manner of their movement suggested otherwise. He focused his optics on the figures and felt his blood run cold. They were armed men moving in tactical formation, clearly attempting to flank their position. Ramirez immediately tried to contact Morrison's element, but his radio calls went unanswered. The terrain was interfering with their communications, leaving the team split and potentially surrounded by enemy forces. Chen began packing essential equipment while Brooks continued tracking the approaching hostiles through his scope. The situation deteriorated rapidly when muzzle flashes erupted from multiple positions around the compound. Morrison's element had been discovered, and they were taking heavy fire from at least 3 different directions. The distinctive crack of AK-47 rounds echoed through the valley as the SEAL team found themselves in a deadly crossfire. Williams returned fire, while Morrison attempted to establish radio contact with air support and their Overwatch element. Foster moved to treat a wounded local who had been caught in the initial burst of gunfire, her medical training overriding the immediate tactical situation. Their carefully planned mission had become a desperate fight for survival. From his position on the ridge, Brooks could see his teammates pinned down near the compound walls. Enemy fighters were maneuvering to cut off their escape routes, while others continued advancing on the Overwatch position. The young sniper realized that his team was facing a coordinated ambush, planned and executed by an enemy who had somehow anticipated their presence. The night erupted into chaos as automatic weapons fire lit up the darkness. Morrison's team was trapped in enemy territory, outnumbered and outgunned with no immediate hope of rescue or reinforcement. Their distress calls echoed through the mountains, desperate pleas for help that seemed to disappear into the hostile wilderness surrounding them. Morrison pressed his body against the mud brick wall as bullets chipped away at the ancient mortar inches from his head. The ambush had been perfectly executed, catching his 3-man element in the worst possible position with minimal cover and no clear escape route. Williams lay wounded behind a small pile of rubble, blood seeping through his tactical vest where shrapnel from a rocket-propelled grenade had found its mark. Foster worked frantically to stabilize Williams while return fire from her sidearm. Her medical training had prepared her for combat casualties, but treating wounds while under direct enemy fire tested every skill she possessed. The tourniquet she applied to Williams's leg would stop the bleeding, but he needed immediate evacuation to survive. Above them on the ridge, Brooks maintained his position despite enemy forces closing in from multiple directions. Through his rifle scope, he could see at least 20 hostile fighters moving through the darkness, their night vision equipment indicating this was no ordinary Taliban unit. These were well-trained fighters with sophisticated gear and coordinated tactics. Ramirez coordinated desperately with their command post, providing grid coordinates for emergency close air support, while Chen attempted to establish communication with Morrison's trapped element. The radio crackled with static and partial transmissions, making coordination nearly impossible in the rocky terrain that blocked most radio signals. Brooks made a difficult decision that would haunt him for years afterward. He could either continue providing overwatch for his pinned teammates below, or engage the enemy forces approaching his position. Either choice meant potentially sacrificing lives to save others. He chose to protect Morrison's element, systematically, engaging targets that threatened his trapped teammates. His first shot dropped an enemy fighter who was positioning a machine gun to rake Morrison's position. The second eliminated a sniper who had been taking careful aim at Foster while she treated Williams. Each shot revealed his position further, drawing more enemy fire toward the ridge where Ramirez and Chen were already fighting for their lives. Morrison realized their situation was deteriorating beyond recovery. Williams was losing blood despite Foster's excellent medical care, and enemy forces were systematically eliminating their options for escape or rescue. He made the hardest decision of his military career, ordering his team to prepare for a fighting withdrawal while he attempted to create a distraction. The SEAL commander exposed himself to enemy fire, drawing attention away from Foster and Williams while laying down suppressive fire with his M4 carbine. Hot brass casings scattered around his boots as he methodically engaged targets, buying precious seconds for his teammates to move toward better cover. Foster half-carried, half-dragged Williams toward a drainage ditch that offered minimal protection but represented their best chance for survival. Williams remained conscious despite his wounds, continuing to engage enemy targets with his sidearm while Foster maneuvered him toward safety. Their years of training together showed in their seamless coordination under extreme stress. On the ridge above, the situation became equally desperate as enemy forces reached positions within grenade range of the Overwatch team. Chen detonated several small charges he had prepared, creating temporary obstacles that slowed the enemy advance while filling the air with dust and debris. The explosions lit up the night sky, revealing the true scope of the forces arrayed against them. Ramirez continued his radio calls for assistance, but the nearest friendly forces were hours away by ground and weather conditions prevented immediate air support. Their GPS coordinates placed them in one of the most remote and hostile regions of Afghanistan, where rescue operations faced enormous logistical challenges, even under ideal conditions. Brooks counted his remaining ammunition and realized he would soon be reduced to his sidearm and whatever explosives Chen had prepared. His sniper rifle had proven devastatingly effective against enemy fighters, but there seemed to be an endless supply of replacements moving through the darkness toward their positions. The enemy commander demonstrated tactical sophistication that surprised the American operators. Rather than mounting costly frontal assaults, he positioned his forces to control key terrain features while systematically tightening the noose around the surrounded SEALs. Machine gun teams established overlapping fields of fire, while snipers engaged from concealed positions. Morrison's radio crackled with a transmission from their command post, informing them that quick reaction forces were mobilizing, but would require significant time to reach their location. The message also warned of additional enemy forces moving toward their area, suggesting that their ambush had been part of a larger operation designed to trap American Special Operations Forces. Foster's medical training became crucial when Williams developed complications from his wounds. The shrapnel had caused more internal damage than initially apparent, and his condition was deteriorating rapidly despite her field treatment. She realized that without surgical intervention within the next few hours, Williams would not survive his injuries. The young medic made a desperate radio call directly to the medical evacuation team, providing detailed information about Williams's condition and requesting immediate extraction regardless of tactical considerations. Her professional assessment was clear. They were losing him, and time was running out for any rescue operation to succeed. Chen rigged his remaining explosives into improvised mines and booby traps, creating a defensive perimeter that would at least warn of approaching enemy forces. His expertise with explosive devices had saved countless lives during their deployment, but he was running low on materials and options for defending their position. Brooks noticed something unusual through his rifle scope, a muzzle flash from a position that didn't match any known enemy locations. The flash pattern and sound signature suggested a different type of weapon, possibly American equipment being used by someone other than the Taliban forces surrounding them. Morrison attempted to raise any friendly forces on emergency frequencies, broadcasting their desperate situation to anyone who might be monitoring radio communications in the area. His calls included authentication codes and detailed information about their tactical situation, hoping that someone with the capability to assist might receive the transmission. The enemy forces began their final assault just before dawn, using the darkness before sunrise to mask their approach. Rocket-propelled grenades impacted near the SEAL positions while machine gun fire swept across their defensive positions. Morrison realized that this coordinated attack would likely overwhelm their remaining ammunition and defensive capabilities. Williams lost consciousness as Foster worked to stabilize his vital signs with her rapidly dwindling medical supplies. The drainage ditch provided some protection from direct fire, but offered no solution to his deteriorating medical condition or their tactical situation. The mountains echoed with the sounds of battle as the SEAL team fought desperately against overwhelming odds, their distress calls becoming increasingly urgent as their situation grew more hopeless with each passing moment. Master Chief Petty Officer Sarah Mitchell had been alone in the Afghan mountains for 6 weeks, conducting a classified reconnaissance mission that officially didn't exist. Her orders came directly from Joint Special Operations Command, tasking her with monitoring Taliban supply routes through some of the most remote terrain in the country. As a member of an elite sniper unit, she operated independently, living off the land and avoiding contact with both enemy and friendly forces. Mitchell had established her hide site in a cave system approximately 2 kilometers from where the SEAL team now fought for their lives. Her position provided excellent observation of 3 major valleys, while remaining completely invisible to ground forces and aerial reconnaissance. She had watched the SEAL team approach 2 days earlier, but maintained radio silence per her operational guidelines. The sounds of intense combat erupted in the pre-dawn darkness, immediately alerting Mitchell that something significant was happening near her area of operations. Through her spotting scope, she could see muzzle flashes and explosions coming from the compound she had been monitoring for Taliban activity. Her training told her to remain hidden and continue her assigned mission. But the intensity of the firefight suggested American forces were in serious trouble. Mitchell's radio equipment was configured for long-range communications with her command structure, not tactical coordination with ground forces. However, she began monitoring emergency frequencies and quickly picked up fragments of distress calls from the embattled SEAL team. The authentication codes and tactical language confirmed these were legitimate American forces facing a life-threatening situation. Her spotting scope revealed the tactical situation developing below. Enemy forces had surrounded what appeared to be a small American unit, systematically eliminating their options for escape or reinforcement. The coordinated nature of the attack suggested sophisticated planning and intelligence gathering by the Taliban forces involved. Mitchell faced a dilemma that would define her military career. Her classified mission required maintaining operational security and avoiding contact that could compromise months of intelligence gathering. However, American service members were dying while she remained hidden in relative safety. Her conscience warred with her orders as she watched the desperate battle unfold. Through her high-powered optics, Mitchell could identify individual enemy positions and the weapons they employed. Her M107 Barrett rifle was capable of engaging targets at ranges exceeding the Taliban forces' ability to return effective fire. From her concealed position, she could potentially eliminate key enemy leaders and weapon systems without revealing her location to the surrounding hostile forces. The Master Chief had earned her reputation through dozens of successful missions in Iraq and Afghanistan. Her skills with long-range precision shooting were legendary among special operations communities, and her ability to operate independently in hostile territory made her ideal for deep reconnaissance missions. She had never failed to complete an assigned mission, but she had also never faced a situation where following orders meant watching fellow Americans die. Mitchell's radio crackled with an increasingly desperate transmission from the trapped SEAL team. Their communications indicated wounded personnel requiring immediate medical evacuation and ammunition running dangerously low. The enemy forces were closing in for what appeared to be their final assault, and the Americans had no remaining options for escape or reinforcement. She made her decision in that moment, knowing it would likely end her military career but unable to live with the alternative. Mitchell began calculating ranges and wind conditions for precision shots that could disrupt the enemy assault and provide the SEALs with opportunities to escape or establish better defensive positions. Her first target was an enemy machine gun position that commanded the high ground overlooking the trapped Americans. The gunner was methodically raking their position with sustained bursts of fire, preventing any movement or counterattack. Mitchell's crosshairs settled on the target as she controlled her breathing and squeezed the trigger with practiced precision. Here, massive .50 caliber round crossed over a kilometer of mountainous terrain in less than 2 seconds, striking the enemy gunner center mass and immediately silencing his weapon. The sound of her rifle echoed through the valleys, but the report came from such a distance that enemy forces couldn't immediately locate its source. Mitchell's second shot eliminated a sniper who had been engaging the SEAL overwatch position on the adjacent ridge. She could see through her scope that the enemy marksman had wounded at least one American and was preparing to engage another target when her bullet ended his threat permanently. The Master Chief continued her systematic engagement of enemy forces, prioritizing targets that posed the greatest threat to the surrounded Americans. Her ammunition was limited, requiring careful target selection and precise shot placement. Each round had to count, both tactically and strategically, as she worked to create opportunities for the SEALs to survive their desperate situation. Enemy commanders began to realize they were taking casualties from an unknown sniper position, causing confusion and disruption in their coordinated assault. Some fighters began scanning the surrounding ridgelines with binoculars and scopes, trying to locate the source of the devastating long-range fire that was systematically eliminating their key personnel. Mitchell observed the impact of her intervention. Through her spotting scope, the trapped SEAL element was beginning to maneuver toward better cover, taking advantage of the disruption she had created in the enemy formation. However, she also realized that her involvement had escalated the situation beyond the capabilities of a single sniper to resolve. Her radio equipment picked up additional Taliban communications, indicating that reinforcements were moving toward the battle area. The enemy forces were calling for additional weapons and personnel to deal with what they perceived as a much larger American presence. Mitchell's intervention, while saving lives in the short term, was attracting more enemy attention to the area. The Master Chief calculated that she had perhaps 30 minutes before enemy forces would begin systematically searching the terrain for her position. Her hide site was excellently concealed, but determined searchers with time and numbers would eventually locate her cave system. She needed to either extract immediately or commit fully to supporting the endangered SEAL team. Mitchell made her second critical decision of the morning, choosing to abandon her classified mission in favor of directly supporting the American forces under attack. She began preparing for a fighting withdrawal from her position, while continuing to engage high-value targets that threatened the SEALs below. Her radio finally crackled with a transmission directed specifically toward her position. Someone among the SEAL team had identified the source of the supporting fire and was attempting to coordinate their defensive efforts with her precision shooting. The authentication codes were correct, confirming that legitimate American forces were trying to establish tactical communication. Mitchell responded with her own authentication, identifying herself as a friendly sniper in overwatch position. The relief in the SEAL team's radio operator was evident, as they realized they were no longer facing the enemy assault alone. However, she also had to inform them that her ammunition and tactical options were limited. The battle was entering a new phase as enemy forces reorganized to deal with the unexpected intervention from an unknown American sniper. Mitchell realized that her actions had bought time for the SEALs, but had also committed her to a fight that would likely determine whether any of them survived to see another sunrise. Morrison couldn't believe what he was hearing through his radio headset. The voice on the emergency frequency identified herself as Master Chief Mitchell, claiming to be in an overwatch position and providing sniper support. Her authentication codes checked out, but Morrison had no knowledge of any friendly forces operating in their area of operations. Ramirez quickly coordinated with Mitchell, providing target descriptions and priority threats that were pinning down their scattered elements. The communications were brief and professional, but Morrison could hear the strain in both voices as they worked to coordinate defensive efforts under intense enemy fire. Brooks observed the effect of Mitchell's long-range shooting through his rifle scope. Enemy fighters who had been advancing confidently were now seeking cover and moving more cautiously. Several key weapons positions had been eliminated, creating gaps in the Taliban formation that the SEALs could potentially exploit for movement or counterattack. Foster continued treating Williams in their drainage ditch, but his condition was deteriorating rapidly, despite her best efforts. The combination of blood loss and shock was overwhelming her field medical capabilities, and she needed to get him to a surgical facility within the next hour, or risk losing him permanently. Chen had exhausted most of his explosive devices creating defensive obstacles, but he began preparing his remaining charges for a different purpose. If their situation became hopeless, he would use the explosives to deny enemy forces any intelligence value from their captured equipment and prevent their weapons from being turned against other American forces. Mitchell's radio crackled with urgent information about enemy reinforcements approaching from multiple directions. Her elevated position provided excellent observation of the surrounding terrain, and she could see additional Taliban units moving through valleys that would cut off any remaining escape routes for the trapped SEALs. Morrison realized they needed to consolidate their scattered elements and attempt a coordinated breakout before the enemy reinforcements arrived. He ordered Brooks to abandon his overwatch position and link up with Ramirez and Chen for movement toward his location near the Hur compound. The maneuver would be dangerous, but remaining separated guaranteed their defeat. The young sniper gathered his essential equipment and prepared to move down the ridge under covering fire from Mitchell's long-range position. His route would expose him to enemy observation and fire, but Mitchell's systematic elimination of key threats had created a narrow window of opportunity. Brooks sprinted down the rocky slope while Mitchell engaged targets that threatened his movement. Her precision shooting was extraordinary, eliminating 3 enemy fighters who attempted to engage the running SEAL with automatic weapons fire. However, her ammunition supply was becoming critically low, limiting her ability to provide sustained support. Ramirez and Chen provided additional covering fire as Brooks reached their position, but the movement had attracted significant enemy attention. Mortar rounds began impacting near their location as Taliban spotters called in indirect fire on the American positions. The enemy was escalating their assault using heavier weapon systems. Mitchell observed the mortar team through her spotting scope and realized she had to eliminate the threat before it could accurately range the SEAL positions. Her shot silenced the mortar crew, but the explosion of stored ammunition created a massive fireball that illuminated her muzzle flash for enemy observers scanning the ridgelines. Several enemy fighters began moving up the slope toward Mitchell's general area, armed with rocket-propelled grenades and automatic weapons. She had perhaps 10 minutes before they reached positions where they could effectively engage her cave system. Her hide site was about to become a death trap. Morrison's 3-man element began their movement toward the ridge where the rest of his team was located. Foster had fashioned a makeshift stretcher from equipment and was attempting to transport Williams while maintaining some degree of combat effectiveness. The distance was only 400 meters, but crossing it under enemy observation would test every skill they possessed. Chen initiated his movement first, using smoke grenades to obscure their advance while engaging targets with his M4 carbine. His explosive expertise had taught him to use terrain features and cover effectively, but the open ground between positions offered minimal protection from enemy fire. Mitchell provided overwatch for the SEAL movement, but her position was becoming increasingly compromised as enemy forces closed in on her location. She had to balance supporting the Americans below with defending herself against the immediate threat of being overrun by hostile fighters. Brooks established a temporary firing position and began engaging enemy forces that threatened the movement of Morrison's element. His sniper training proved invaluable as he systematically eliminated targets at ranges where his teammates' carbines were less effective. However, his position was also becoming the focus of increasing enemy attention. Foster dragged Williams across the rocky terrain while Morrison and Chen provided covering fire. The wounded SEAL remained conscious but was weakening rapidly, his vital signs indicating that he was going into shock despite her medical interventions. Time was running out for any hope of saving his life. Ramirez coordinated with Mitchell, providing her with intelligence about enemy movements while attempting to establish contact with their command post for emergency extraction. The radio communications were intermittent due to terrain interference, but he managed to transmit their grid coordinates and urgency of their medical situation. Mitchell made a tactical decision to abandon her hide site before enemy forces could surround her position. She gathered essential equipment and began moving toward a secondary position she had identified during her weeks of reconnaissance. The movement would temporarily interrupt her ability to provide overwatch, leaving the SEALs exposed during a critical phase of their consolidation. Enemy forces launched a coordinated assault just as Mitchell began her movement, recognizing that the American sniper was relocating and attempting to exploit the temporary gap in covering fire. Machine gun teams and grenade launchers focused their fire on the SEAL positions, while other fighters moved to flank their defensive line. Morrison realized that their window for escape was rapidly closing. Enemy reinforcements were arriving. Mitchell was under direct assault and Williams desperately needed medical evacuation. He made the decision to call in danger-close artillery support from their command post, despite the risk to their own positions. The coordinates Morrison provided would place artillery impacts within 50 meters of their own location, close enough that friendly fire could kill them as easily as the enemy forces. However, it represented their only chance to break up the enemy assault and create an opportunity for extraction. Brooks counted his remaining ammunition and realized he was down to his last magazine. Chen had expended most of his explosive devices, and Foster was running low on medical supplies needed to keep Williams alive. Their tactical situation was becoming impossible to sustain. Mitchell reached her secondary position and immediately began engaging the enemy forces that were overrunning her previous hide site. Her movement had prevented capture, but the enemy now knew her approximate location and was systematically searching the terrain to locate her new position. The sound of incoming artillery rounds whistled through the mountain air as Morrison's danger close fire mission arrived on target. The explosions shattered the pre-dawn darkness and temporarily disrupted the enemy assault, but the Americans knew they had only minutes before the Taliban forces reorganized and resumed their attack. The artillery rounds impacted with devastating precision, sending shockwaves through the mountain valley and momentarily silencing enemy weapons. Mitchell felt the concussion from her new position as debris rained down across the battlefield. The danger-close support had successfully disrupted the Taliban assault, but she knew the effect would be temporary. Morrison's team used the brief respite to complete their consolidation, with Foster finally reaching the ridge position while still supporting the critically wounded Williams. The corpsman's assessment was grim. Williams had lost significant blood and was showing signs of severe shock that her field medical supplies couldn't adequately address. Brooks immediately took up a defensive firing position while Chen began preparing their remaining explosives for emergency demolition of sensitive equipment. The artillery had bought them time, but enemy forces were already beginning to reorganize in positions beyond the impact area. Mitchell observed enemy reinforcements approaching from 3 separate valleys through her spotting scope. The Taliban commander was committing significant resources to eliminate what he perceived as a major American presence. Her intervention had successfully saved the SEAL team from immediate destruction, but had also escalated the engagement beyond anything a small unit could handle. Ramirez established communication with their quick reaction force, learning that extraction helicopters were finally airborne and approaching their location. However, the flight time would still require 45 minutes, and the landing zone would need to be secured against heavy enemy fire before any aircraft could safely approach. The Master Chief realized that her ammunition situation had become critical. She had perhaps 6 rounds remaining for her Barrett rifle, limiting her ability to provide sustained support for the extraction operation. Each shot would need to count, requiring perfect target selection and shot placement. Enemy mortars began, impacting near the consolidated SEAL position as Taliban spotters adjusted their fire based on the artillery impact areas. Morrison recognized that they needed to move immediately, or risk being systematically eliminated by indirect fire that they couldn't effectively counter with small arms. Chen identified a series of rocky positions approximately 200 meters up the ridge that would provide better cover from mortar fire, while offering defensive advantages for the extraction. However, moving Williams in his current condition across that terrain would be extremely difficult and potentially fatal. Foster made a crucial decision to administer her remaining morphine to Williams, knowing it would ease his pain during movement, but might also mask symptoms of internal bleeding that could prove fatal. Her medical training indicated he would likely die without immediate surgery, but moving him was the only chance for evacuation. Mitchell engaged a Taliban spotter who was directing mortar fire onto the American position, her shot eliminating the threat but also revealing her new location to enemy forces searching for her position. She immediately began preparing to move again, knowing that remaining stationary invited catastrophic retaliation. Brooks and Chen began the dangerous movement toward better defensive positions, while Morrison coordinated with the inbound extraction aircraft. The helicopters would require suppression of enemy air defense weapons before they could safely enter the valley to retrieve the wounded and surrounded Americans. The SEAL team's movement up the ridge exposed them to enemy observation and fire from multiple directions. Mitchell provided what covering fire she could with her remaining ammunition, But the Taliban forces were learning to anticipate her shooting positions and were taking appropriate countermeasures. Foster rigged an improvised stretcher system that would allow her and Morrison to transport Williams while maintaining some ability to return fire if necessary. The wounded SEAL was barely conscious but continued to grip his sidearm, determined to contribute to his team's defense despite his deteriorating condition. Enemy forces launched another coordinated assault, this time approaching from directions that limited Mitchell's ability to provide effective overwatch fire. She was forced to engage targets at extreme ranges with her remaining ammunition, making shots that tested the absolute limits of her weapon system's capabilities. Ramirez coordinated air support requests with their command post, providing detailed information about enemy positions and weapon systems that threatened the inbound extraction aircraft. The helicopter crews needed precise intelligence to plan their approach and landing in the face of heavy ground fire. Chen reached the new defensive position and immediately began preparing it for sustained defense against ground assault. His explosive expertise allowed him to create defensive obstacles and early warning systems using his remaining demolition materials, but supplies were critically low. Mitchell observed advanced Taliban fighters moving with night vision equipment and sophisticated communications gear, indicating this was an elite enemy unit rather than ordinary insurgents. The level of coordination and equipment suggested they were facing a specially trained force, prepared for operations against American Special Operations units. Brooks established overwatch from the new position and immediately identified multiple enemy approach routes that would need to be covered during the extraction operation. His sniper training allowed him to prioritize threats and develop engagement plans, but he was down to his final ammunition loadouts. The sound of helicopter rotors echoed through the valley as the quick reaction force approached the landing zone. Morrison popped smoke to mark their position, while simultaneously coordinating suppressive fire against enemy positions that threatened the aircraft approach routes. Foster monitored Williams' vital signs and realized he was slipping deeper into shock despite her medical interventions. The combination of blood loss, pain, and stress was overwhelming his body's ability to compensate. She estimated he had perhaps 20 minutes before his condition became irreversible. Mitchell made her final shot with the Barrett rifle, eliminating an enemy fighter who was preparing to engage the inbound helicopters with a shoulder-fired surface-to-air missile. The shot prevented catastrophic loss of the extraction aircraft but left her armed only with her sidearm and whatever explosives she could improvise. Enemy mortar fire intensified as Taliban forces recognized that American aircraft were approaching for extraction. The indirect fire began walking closer to the SEAL position, requiring immediate movement to avoid being eliminated by precision mortar strikes guided by enemy observers. Chen detonated several defensive charges, creating smoke and debris that obscured enemy observation while the team prepared for final movement to the landing zone. The explosions also served as a signal to the helicopter crews about the location of friendly forces in relation to enemy positions. Morrison realized that their extraction window would be extremely narrow, perhaps 60 seconds, while the helicopters were on the ground before enemy fire would force them to abort the mission. Every second of that window would need to be perfectly coordinated between the aircrew, ground forces, and supporting fires. The Master Chief began her own movement toward the extraction point, abandoning her overwatch position to link up with the SEAL team for evacuation. Her classified reconnaissance mission was officially over, sacrificed to save American lives in a desperate mountain battle that would be remembered long after the war ended. Ramirez provided final coordination with the inbound aircraft while enemy automatic weapons fire began impacting near their position. The extraction was beginning, but the most dangerous phase of their ordeal was just starting as Taliban forces made their final desperate attempt to prevent the Americans from escaping. The first MH-60 Blackhawk helicopter swept into the valley with door gunners laying down suppressive fire against enemy positions. The aircraft's approach was aggressive and fast, designed to minimize exposure time to ground fire while providing maximum firepower against Taliban forces threatening the landing zone. Morrison coordinated the evacuation sequence through his radio headset, while Foster prepared Williams for immediate transport. The wounded SEAL had lost consciousness again, his vital signs indicating that he was running out of time despite her continuous medical care throughout the firefight. Brooks provided precision fire against enemy targets that threatened the helicopter's approach, his final magazines depleting rapidly as he engaged multiple threats simultaneously. His sniper training proved crucial as he eliminated key enemy positions that could have devastated the extraction aircraft with coordinated fire. Mitchell reached the landing zone just as the first helicopter touched down, her long movement from the overwatch position having taken her through terrain swept by enemy fire. Several Taliban fighters had attempted to intercept her during the approach, but her combat experience and determination had carried her through multiple close encounters. The helicopter crew chief waved frantically for immediate boarding as automatic weapons fire impacted around the aircraft. Foster and Morrison loaded Williams onto the helicopter, while Chen provided covering fire with his remaining ammunition. Every second on the ground increased the risk of catastrophic enemy fire destroying the aircraft. Ramirez coordinated with the second helicopter, which was approaching to extract the remaining team members and Mitchell. The aircraft came under immediate fire from multiple enemy positions as it descended toward the makeshift landing zone, forcing the pilots to execute evasive maneuvers while maintaining their approach. Chen threw his final explosive charges toward advancing enemy positions before sprinting toward the second helicopter. The detonations created a temporary barrier of smoke and debris that obscured Taliban fighters who were attempting to overrun the American position during the extraction phase. Brooks fired his last rounds at an enemy machine gun crew that was positioning to rake the landing zone with sustained fire. His shots eliminated the immediate threat, but he could see additional enemy forces moving to replace the eliminated positions. The Taliban commander was committing everything to prevent the American escape. Mick,